Everybody, welcome to another episode of What a Hell of a Way to Die. It's me and Nate back in the saddle again after a couple weeks of some vacation and bouncing around and a few other things. So it's March. We're coming into springtime. Nate, how's things on your side of the ocean there?
I have COVID. After 2 years, I managed to get it. I went out for Milo's birthday and went to a pub and then a restaurant and then another pub and a bar. London is... I like London in some ways, but it's interesting to me how, because pubs close relatively early, after hours spots are pretty popular and can be everything from like clubs to just bars. But we went to a bar that was like, one of those interesting mixology cocktail bars, but this being London, everything has to be annoying. So they use like centrifuges to like extract flavor from things for the drinks. I got a cocktail that was delicious, but it genuinely had like yogurt flavor in it, and it was completely clear because they had extracted it with a centrifuge. And all the people working at the bar have to fucking wear jumpsuits, like they were like they're like lab techs. So it's very, very stupid.
That reminds me of, there was a bar here in St. Louis called Sub-Zero where the center of like the bar had a band of ice, and you're just like supposed to like keep your drinks on the band of ice that went across the thing and keep your drink cold. And what it really did is just make my hand wet a lot, and it was very irritating. It's like, cool, I love to be cold at a bar and also everything to be wet and cold. Fantastic. That bar does not exist anymore.
Big surprise that places that have really annoying central premises wind up not staying in business. Yeah, I mean, like, I knew I was taking a risk going out. I'm double vaxxed plus booster, so is Cynthia. But worst possible scenario happened, stayed out late, and then I thought I would be fine because all my friends who've gotten Omicron had it within 24 hours, they had symptoms. 48 hours later, I was fine. I had no symptoms. I was great. I was actually doing way better than I ought to have. And then early Monday morning, I had a sore throat and took a test, and I was positive. And Cynthia managed to test negative for over a week and then tested positive finally. So not only did our mitigation efforts of me quarantining in another room and keeping the windows open and wearing a mask when I was in the common areas and stuff like that, not only did that not work, but it delayed her getting it to the point where she had to then reschedule an appointment that was really important to her for a dental thing. So it's irritating. Worst case possible outcome, except for the fact that neither of us has it pretty severely. I mean, I alternate between being insanely energetic and insanely tired. But all I really had was my first day was kind of freaky. Other than that, it was fine. Sore throat, weird sinuses, but not even really all that bad compared to like when I got strep after we visited Bath in September. I was worse off than this. I was way sicker than this. And I didn't have COVID, and I wound up getting on antibiotics and it fixed it. But like, I will say though, fuck's sake, man, that first night, if that's even a fraction of what it was like in 2020 pre any vaccine, good God, I'm so glad I didn't catch it, because that was wild.
It seems not great, because I know I've seen other people get it, and like I hate being sick in general. So as anybody does, nobody wants to be sick. So I've been doing very well to avoid it. All of our mask mandates are now gone in St. Louis, though. So we are going to see how that's going to work out.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Omicron and with BA2, like the Omicron variant, is that quite frankly, like I'm all for people being better about personal hygiene. I really am. And I think that like the fact that wearing masks and social distancing has significantly reduced flu deaths is some indication of the fact that like there's something to be salvaged there. But the problem with Omicron and BA2 is that they're as infectious as the measles. Like, it's so hard to prevent it. So it's like wearing a mask is good if you're wearing a mask. If everyone's wearing masks that are like N95 or better, or what they call FFP2 or FFP3 here in the UK. The problem is just wearing like a homemade cloth mask does nothing with something that infectious. And like, I'm not trying to spread anti-mask shit. I'm just saying that like, it may have helped to some extent with the initial variant or version of COVID and some of the other ones. But like, as it's gotten more infectious, it's so unbelievably transmissible that like, in a way, wearing a mask is a good thing, but it also can give you a false sense of security because you're wearing like a cloth barrier, and that isn't really doing that much. Both you potentially giving it to people and you potentially getting it. So it's frustrating because it's like, I think if we got into the habit of people wearing surgical masks when they were sick in public, it would be a massive improvement on our public health overall.
Yes.
It's insane to me that it's become such a stupidly politicized thing in America. It is here too, to an extent, but not quite as bad because it never really took off as much here. Like, it was mandated in certain places, but like, for example, no one wore masks outdoors here unless they were like coming and going from the bus. An exception to that, I would say, in my experience at least, is there are a lot of college students from Hong Kong here, and they all wear masks even when outdoors. But most British people, in my experience, residents of the UK who aren't, students from East Asia, typically don't wear masks outdoors ever. And unless they're literally coming and going from public transit where it was mandated, now it's no longer mandated. But they were wearing it, by and large on buses, trains, etc., and in shops, and that's definitely gone away. And so I knew in a way when I went out, I was like, in the first pub, I was like, yeah, windows aren't open. There's lots of people in here. Like, if someone's got it, I'm gonna get it. And then we went to a restaurant, like a big banquet hall, and there's so many people in there, and I was just like, yeah, if someone's got it in here, I'm gonna get it. Similarly, next pub, even more crowded. I was like, yep, I'm probably going to get it if someone here has it. And then bar, we had to wait in line, and then it was like full to capacity in a very small bar. And I was like, oh, I'm definitely going to get it if somebody has it here. And sure enough, I got it. So it fucking sucks. But like, at a certain point, it's like, it's gotten so transmissible that I don't know what you can do other than, like, because the government's not going to do shit. They're not going to stop things. They're not going to close things down. They're not going to provide support to businesses. They're not going to provide support to individuals. I've said it before on this show in the United Kingdom, people didn't get any direct support, even like what the US did. There were no recovery payments or stimulus checks. There was no expanded UI. There was nothing. There was an additional £20 a week that some people were eligible for on state benefits, and they stopped some of the more insanely punitive things about state benefits of like, you have to do like 14 fucking, job applications a week kind of shit during COVID, but it's all back now. And they've clawed back that additional £20, and they're making it even more restrictive. So like, ultimately, you can't blame people for saying, fuck it. If it's just like the cold, I'm just going to go out and get it or not care anymore in this country, particularly because everyone in this country knows no help is coming. No assistance is coming. So like, yeah,
but at least you guys got healthcare though. Like America parties as if we do have free healthcare, but we do not. Like, that's always my biggest worry is just like, if I get sick and I get, some version that fucking flattens me for a while and puts me in the hospital, that is really fucking fucking with my money and my abilities to do anything. And in England, it's you at least have that option. And like, I wouldn't get sick pay. I wouldn't.
Sick pay is terrible in this country. It's atrocious the way that it's set up. You do have free healthcare. That's true. If you go to the hospital, you weren't going to pay anything. If you, they are charging for COVID tests as of April 1st, but up until now, you could get free COVID tests pretty much on demand. You can still get 7 free COVID tests in the mail. Cynthia and I have gotten, like, she can get 7, I can get 7. You can order them every 3 days. For a while, you could order them every day. Like, we were able to get lots of, like, they basically set it up for a while here where if you wanted to take a COVID test literally every single time you left your house for work, you could, and you could get them for free. I acknowledge that did not exist in America. But when you talk about stuff like sick pay, like if COVID wiped me out, I wouldn't get any money from the government because I'm technically self-employed. And if Cynthia got wiped out from work, like her work might be more generous, but the actual letter of the law is not generous at all. It does exist, but it's the same thing like maternity pay here. It does exist, but it's incredibly low relative to every other European country. So in a way, Britain kind of gets off on being like, well, we're not as bad as America. It's like, yeah, but maternity pay, for example, maternity pay is capped
a low fucking bar.
Is capped at 90% of your salary for the first 5 weeks. And then after that, it's like, you have to go back to work, or you can get like, I think 75 or 100 pounds a week, which, okay, that's money, but like, if you live in London, that's not a lot of money. That's 100 pounds a week is like $130 a week. Like if you had a salaried job and you were making, say, the equivalent of $3,000 a month after taxes, to suddenly turn around and be like, oh yeah, you're going to make $600 a month. That's not really maternity pay now, is it? Like, it's just, it's basically, it's like a check the block exercise. So don't get me wrong. Like, it's better than what America has. But I wouldn't point to Britain and say, if only we had what Britain has in America, America would be better, because not only does Britain not provide all that much, relatively speaking, it's cut so much since the 70s. And like, I guarantee you, in 20, 30 years, it'll be worse than America. And there will
One
not
of the
be an NHS as, it is presently constituted. So
yeah, one of the more insane things that when I got like a real corporate job and had to deal with the various benefits and everything, one of them was like short-term disability, and I never really understood what that was until somebody was like, "Oh, I'm pregnant. I'm going to take my short-term disability." When it's like, so you can buy insurance that specifically just pays you for 12 weeks. Like you're buying insurance so that you can be paid out during your not during your pregnancy, but like for like 12 weeks after you have a kid, and after 12 weeks you're back. You got to be back. Now my current job is much nicer. They pay 9 weeks outright for maternity leave and 2 weeks for paternity leave, and I think that's actually like now that's um you can take, like, me as the guy, I can take all of it. You get to choose which one you want to do. So that's not like, but also I have a very good job that I'm very happy with, and that I never want to leave because they're very nice to me. And it's one of those, just like, I cling to this job because like the benefits are so good, and I live in this hellscape of America where just like at any point in time, something could happen, and then just like you're fucked for the rest of your life. So it's wonderful, wonderful system of government that we have going on. Wonderful ideas coming up by rich and powerful people who we put into power for some reason, who don't actually give a shit about us. It's great.
yeah, it sucks. And so, I mean, it's one of these situations where, having experienced this, I feel as though it's important to be honest about what you're experiencing. And I can definitely say that there are some ways in which it's far better here and some ways in which it's worse. And, and there's things in America that are or were better, and things that are way, way worse. And I think, realistically speaking, it sucks to finally get COVID, but I suppose I would have preferred to wait until there was like a variant that fucking gives you a manicure and pedicure, and that's the only side effects. Like, I would expect that it would be nicer to wait until you get it and it's like imperceptible. But what I got was pretty mild, and I'm glad I did all the vaccinations and shit. I did it as soon as they allowed me to. It was funny to me because Milo got it too, and Milo had Omicron in December. So it's not even 3 months later and he gets it again. And I don't know if that's because this is the different variant, which can defeat even the immunity you get from previous Omicron. But like, yeah, he got it too. And so it's one of these situations where that does kind of freak me out a little. I mean, like, at this point, whatever, I'm going to do the best I can to be responsible. And I feel as though I'm probably going to assume every time I go out, there's going to be a risk of getting it. And like, while it's not the end of the world, it's still annoying. But there is something to be said for the fact that like a lot of this shit hinges on the idea that if people all get it and they recover from it, then they're immune, at least for a while. And so if the variants are developing fast enough that like you can get it and then get it again within the period that would normally grant you immunity, like, that sucks, because that kind of throws that strategy out the fucking window, doesn't it?
Well, and also, I mean, who's to say that that Milo's not picking up like some old Delta strain that somebody's just still got hanging out, and there's so many strains out there. Who knows? It's like the flu shot has like 20 different strains in it every year because the flu is just a constantly mutating thing.
And I mean, I remember getting the flu when I had a flu shot and it sucked, but I also remember getting the flu when I didn't have a flu shot and it was so much worse.
It's worse. It's way worse. Hey, there's a lot of things that America and Britain, there's reasons to celebrate being in one and not the other. In America, we can't get a chip buddy. Nobody knows what that is here.
I mean, are you missing out on having a buttered roll with French fries in the middle of it? Probably not.
I don't know if I am or not. Or
a crisp buddy, which is the same thing, but instead of French fries, it's potato chips. Like, you take a bag of Ruffles and you throw it inside a breaded hamburger bun. That's basically a crisp buddy.
So one of my favorite things to do, like, is to make a sandwich and then put potato chips on top of it, because I love the soft and the crunch, and it absolutely, when I make a sandwich like that, I have to leave the room from my wife because she cannot stand listening to me eat that. So
what about putting them inside the sandwich though? Because that's the thing, I support putting potato chips in a sandwich. I'm a huge fan, for example, of when you make a disgusting breakfast sandwich, throwing hash browns in the sandwich. I think that improves them significantly. There's a lot of stuff you can do, and there's things that Britain does better than America, a few things here and there. There's a lot of stuff that America does better than Britain. By and large, they're shitty in their own ways, but there's a huge crossover, much like we've made the comment that America and Russia are more similar than people want to admit. And America and Britain think of themselves as having a special relationship, but in some ways are similar in ways they don't acknowledge, and then in other ways are completely different. I think Britain and Russia are pretty similar too in a lot of ways.
Well, yeah, there's certainly a lot of Russian money running around Britain and Russia.
Yeah, there definitely is. I mean, we have reoriented our economy to be a dark money sump for ill-gotten gains around the world, and now people are surprised that the government doesn't want to investigate all of these scare quotes suicides that have happened of people who have run afoul of Putin in the United Kingdom.
All these people killing themselves with polonium.
Yeah, killing themselves with polonium, killing themselves by somehow
throwing themselves in front of a train,
beating themselves to death inside a duffel bag that's been padlocked from the outside, but they did it to themselves. I'm
shooting
not
themselves
joking.
in the back of the head twice.
Genuinely, it's a joke. But one thing that happened in the news in between the last time you and I recorded is that Russia invaded Ukraine, and we made it a point to not prognosticate. We basically said we didn't think it would happen, but if it did happen, it would be bad because it would be two conscript armies getting ground into dirt for no other reason besides the imperial delusions of Russia and or proxy battles between the West and Russia. That has happened and it sucks. I think the only comment I can make beyond the fact that I didn't expect it was going to happen, but I wanted to hedge my bets because anytime there's a huge buildup like that, it's entirely possible. It's just more in the same way that maybe this is just me habitually getting owned. I didn't think the U.S. was going to invade Iraq in 2003. I remember the buildup, and I was like, this is a bluff. This is just not going to happen. And then it did happen, and I was like, well, I'm owned. That's sort of how I felt when I woke up on the morning the 24th and checked the news and saw it. But frankly, I feel as though if there's a big thing, nothing here is good. Nothing here is positive. There's arguments to be made about what caused this, what led up to it. But ultimately, blame has to rest solely on the person who gave the order to invade Ukraine. The rest, I don't know what the fuck's going to happen. I don't think that it's a good thing to be cheering on dumping weapons into a war zone in Europe because this has had serious effects, beyond the fact that it's just going to be a humanitarian disaster. Those effects will ripple throughout Europe, Eastern Europe, Central Europe, Western Europe, Northern Europe, and it's going to be bad. And so I feel like the best we could hope for, in my opinion, is that Russia gets out of Ukraine as quickly as possible via some sort of face-saving measure with peace talks that effectively restores what was there before, and guarantees Ukrainian sovereignty. The rest, don't fall for fucking propaganda. Don't be a mark. Don't be a rube. And certainly don't celebrate, be like, oh, well, normally I wouldn't violate the Geneva Conventions, but I think it's so important to share these videos of POWs. Or normally I wouldn't, retweet obvious fucking lies, but I'm going to do it because it feels good. It's like, are you a conservative blogger in 2004? Shut the fuck up. Don't be a fucking child. And that's basically it. I'm horrified because I know what it represents and what it means in real life. I'm seeing a lot of things that make me really angry. The only thing that makes me angrier than the very obvious, well, these are white refugees, so they count more rhetoric that you see from continental European governments is the United Kingdom being like, no, keep them all out. We fucking don't want anyone. Their commitment to racism is fucking paramount. There's a lot of stuff that I'm very angry at. I'm happy that Ukrainians have mounted a spirited defense and that Russia called this so wrong. I'm flabbergasted by what appears to be the sheer volume of corruption in the Russian armed forces that has led them to be so unprepared and just basic maintenance not being done. But the boosterism and the just guileless repeating propaganda, the self-deception, the extent to which people want to bandy about this idea of a no-fly zone when A, Russia hasn't established air superiority in Ukraine. B, why in the fuck would NATO air forces want to fly in a country where every third person apparently has a Stinger missile? And C, the fact that this would then precipitate confrontation between NATO air forces and Russian air forces, which they're going to get into shooting fights, which is going to require an armed response, which means an escalation, which means you now have a shooting war between a NATO member and Russia, which consequently means they're going to invoke NATO Article 5, which means you're then going to draw the entirety of the NATO alliance into a war with Russia, which means a nuclear war. Even if it doesn't immediately become a nuclear war, it will mean a nuclear war. Don't be a fucking child. Just acknowledge the reality you live in and don't pretend that you can just fucking meme your way into a different reality. That stuff makes me furious. And so I just feel as though A no-fly zone doesn't mean just like, oh, we have a no war zone. It means using our aircraft to deny the airspace to Russian aircraft, which means forcing them out by shooting them down, or at least threatening to shoot them down convincingly. It also means you can't just have them floating indefinitely. That means moving our air forces into, eastern Poland, into far eastern Romania, potentially into Baltic states, and then potentially overflying Russian airspace. Like, it's just you have to understand that, like, you can't just snap your fingers and say, oh, we're just going to do this and it's going to make things okay. Like, it requires an escalation, and there's a reason why NATO member militaries refuse to do it, because people whose job it is to know this shit understand what a non-starter that idea is. Mm-hmm. And like, I'm sorry, like, I don't want to be Mr. Credentials. I don't want to be like, oh, like, if you weren't talking about this last week, don't talk about it now. Like, that's a stupid argument. But the one thing I'm going to say is that know at least what it is that you're advocating for. And it's like, I'm sorry, but like, apparently the one thing that's more common than beetroot soup in Ukraine is fucking surface to air missiles. Like, why would you want American and British and French and German and Lithuanian pilots flying over this? Come on, man. Don't be a fucking idiot.
And no-fly zone doesn't just mean airplanes. It can also mean artillery. It can also mean, anything that goes up into the air can be considered something that needs to be shot down or something that needs to be denied.
Yeah, are you going to put NATO air defense assets in Ukraine? Yeah. Are you going to have them on the border? Are you going to have, Patriot missiles? Are you going to have fucking, vehicle mounted Stingers on the border? Like, are you going to be firing across borders into another country's sovereign airspace? Like, this is not just, I hate to be one of these people that's like, oh, it's more complicated, it's nuanced, but it's like, it is actually nuanced here. Like, it represents an escalation that is too dangerous for the decision makers who actually know what they're talking about to take. Like, and given the capriciousness with which NATO has gotten involved in other conflicts, in the Middle East, in North Africa, in Central Asia, given the relative kid gloves that they have treated the threats with, in other situations where, you could potentially find yourself, butting up against hostile militaries that could then create an escalation scenario. Like, the fact that they are this circumspect should tell you something. Like, do you want to get into a shooting war with Russia, which would then draw all NATO members into a war that would then be a force-on-force conflict with Russia? Like, if the answer is no, then stop fucking invoking this like it's a goddamn Harry Potter spell.
One of my favorite things that I saw is, anytime there's pictures of like Russian armored columns and something, and somebody's just like, oh man, it's like an A-10 pilot's wet dream. Like, an A-10 pilot would not get anywhere near that, dude. You do not understand like how useless a fucking A-10 is if you don't have air superiority.
Yeah, and it's
like A-10's great. It's a great meme, but guys, you can't. That's not a fucking thing. Like, you can't bring that thing in.
Sure, and it's like if you had a battalion's worth of Apaches, of attack weapons, that would be great. But like, if they aren't defended, they're not going to go after that stuff. And it's like, for better or worse, despite the terrible maintenance, the Russians do have surface-to-air missiles and stuff that can target aircraft. Like, this is a conflict larger in scale and also in technical sophistication than we've seen in a really long time. And so, like, this notion that the US can just show up and highway of death everything, like, it's not. Like, one of the reasons why the highway of death was able to happen was because of the overmatched technology that the US and the coalition had in 1991 versus the Iraqi military. Yeah, similarly, in 2003.
It's very simple to fry a bunch of civilians and fleeing soldiers.
Like, yeah, exactly. A bunch of soft-skin trucks getting fucking lit up by every fixed and rotary wing aviation asset that the U.S. military has. Different story, but like, I think it's not something that people who assess this kind of risk for a living take lightly. And I have tried to not be online or elsewhere just yelling and screaming about stuff, because I feel as though I'm not adding anything to the discussion. And we don't have to talk about this whole episode. I just feel as though the thing to understand here is that a no-fly zone is not just a magic incantation. It requires the enforcement of a no-fly zone. And if you recall the no-fly zone the U.S. had over northern Iraq in the 90s, They were shooting down Iraqi planes on a regular basis. Now, if we were shooting down Russian planes or Russian planes were shooting down our planes on a regular basis, this would escalate the conflict and therefore require more or less a declaration of war against Russia, because it would be an attack on a NATO member. Like, I just want you guys to understand that NATO is a military alliance, and the whole premise of it supposedly, creating deterrence is that an attack on one is an attack on all. And if you put your fucking fixed-wing aviation assets out in a place where they can get shot at or shot down by the Russians, they are attacking a NATO member's military forces.
Look, as we've said, there's strength in a union. So, NATO.
You fucking God. I mean, look, here's the thing, right? Like, there's arguments about NATO expansion was controversial in the 90s and 2000s. And I think that's discussion that at the present moment is relevant, but not as relevant as the fact that Russia made the decision to invade Ukraine without an actual casus belli provocation. They made up some bullshit. They invaded, and they were trying to overthrow the government and install a puppet state. And what they stated overtly is that Ukrainian identity doesn't exist, that it's all Russia. Like, that's fucking bananas. And quite frankly,
that's
that is a
cleansing, guys.
Yeah, that is a bigger call it provocation, if you will. That is a bigger act of malfeasance than, what you might describe as a kind of sneaky Atlanticism with regard to trying to expand NATO to hem Russia in. I think that it's pretty ridiculous to offer NATO membership or pretend you were going to offer NATO membership to Ukraine or Georgia when everyone knows that this was never going to happen, that all NATO militaries have to accept the addition of a new member. And there's no way on this planet that European NATO members were going to accept Ukrainian or Georgian NATO membership. It just wasn't going to happen. But it became a talking point that, was basically then not just, it's weird. It was like they were trying to paint Russia into a corner, and in a way they went up painting themselves into a corner by mistake, because then backing down on this idea of expanding NATO to Georgia or to Ukraine would be weakness. It would be letting Putin win if you back down on this thing you were never in a million years going to actually follow through with. So there is that argument to be made. There's no fucking way that Germany was going to accept, for example, letting Ukraine into NATO. I strongly doubt you would have gotten unanimous consent to allow Georgia in either. And on one hand, yeah, when you look at Georgia and you say, Jesus, that's a really far-ass place away from the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. But then Turkey's a NATO member and Turkey has a border with Georgia. So there's a lot of, call it things that would seem to be unthinkable that have already happened. But at the end of the day, in a way, to me, it felt like a cruel thing to do, to say to Ukraine, hey, no, we'll definitely consider you for NATO membership, when actually that was never going to happen. And then because of domestic politics in the United States and Canada, never admitting it was not going to happen, while, so Ukraine effectively has the detriment of all of that Russian fucking, outrage and subterfuge and trying to subvert their government, without the notional benefit of NATO membership, because everyone knew it was never going to happen. That's fucked up, and that's not responsible statecraft, if you will. But I'm some dumbass ex-army captain, and you're a former PAO guy. So no one's listening to us for advice on fucking international relations. And if you hear this and you hear me saying that, and you're like, well, I think this is a valid point, where it's yeah, and that's why it really is embarrassing how fucking shitty both American governance and media are, because quite frankly, anybody could have seen this coming, and it sucks. But I have to preface this with that doesn't excuse what Putin did. And obviously, the primary threat, the thing to address right now, is the fact that Russia invaded a sovereign country and is basically trying to
annex
it in a way that pretends it's still a sovereign country while basically denying it in agency across the board. And I don't want to bog down in stuff about the specific details, because I'm not Ukrainian, and also Ukrainian nationalism in Ukraine is very, very different than Ukrainian nationalism in Canada, for example. But I think the thing about it is that there are parts of Ukraine where closer ties with Russia are popular, and there are parts of Ukraine where closer ties with anyone but Russia is very popular. So like it's a difficult thing to peg down and say this is a valid expression of the people's will and everything else is just foreign influence. I don't fucking know. What I do know is what Russia did is wrong, and that fundamentally has to be like at the forefront. Like the situation has changed. It's no longer a theoretical debate. It's a one country brutally aggressing a weaker country.
Yeah, and that's why like I have tried to shy away from talking too much about Ukraine. I mean, I'll make fun of Russians because it's Russia. I'll make fun of Russians running out. The
total lack of maintenance shit is fucking hilarious to me.
As I said, like our invasion in Iraq and Afghanistan, completely unjust, should not have happened. We were complete dickheads for doing it. However, we never had our tanks run out of gas. So we got a one up there on dumbass invasions. Like we did a dumbass invasion, but
guys getting MRAP stolen in Afghanistan, that did happen,
sure.
But like not at this scale. And I would also say that stuff like, oh yeah, our rations have been expired for 7 years. We didn't have fuel. We don't have fuel points. We haven't done any tire rotations or maintenance on our pressure systems on our vehicles. We haven't greased the treads of our tracked vehicles. We haven't done any kind of preventative maintenance checks and services. Like what has been confirmed is that very few people below the mid to senior officer ranks knew this was actually going to happen. Pretty much everybody from junior NCOs on downward was told that they were just doing exercises on the Russian-Ukrainian border or Belarusian-Ukrainian border. And that this was training. It was live fire training, but it was training. They didn't know they were in Ukraine until they started getting shot at. One of the things, so that as I understand has been reported all over the place from captives, interviews with captives and stuff like that. So that
when you get told you're going to Atropia and you end up in Ukraine.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things that people have hypothesized, and it does seem plausible because it jives with reports I had heard previously of stuff like Russian troops in Belarus, flogging off their shit or like cutting down trees on farmers' land to like use as firewood, stuff like that, was that morale was really low and they just were like kind of sitting in a bog. And it sounds as though it's possible that because no one knew they were actually going to invade Ukraine, people were flogging off excess fuel, like selling it to Belarusians and rural Russians, like, hey guys, do you want some of this extra diesel and shit like that? We don't fucking need it. And then they had to invade
the
Ukraine.
Russians, man. God love them. If they're not selling it for extra money, they're getting drunk off of it.
Well, the American way of doing this involves defrauding the supply system because America has infinite money just for the military. So if you're going to get rich off the military, it's either like stealing parts that you can basically report as consumed and then selling them when you get home, or it's buying shit where you've got like a money hose turned on and they're not tracking it and then selling it when you get home. Or if you're actually being handed money to use for reconstruction or other stuff like supply chain acquisition, just pocketing that money and then, buying a Hummer with wads of cash when you come home. That's how we, by and large, did fraud as a country in Iraq and Afghanistan. But selling fuel, well, I don't know, man. I never saw that. I mean, I saw like trading fuel for favors because we could get fuel from the... Oh, help me out, bro. Was it class 3? Like whatever the
I think it's the 3. Yeah. I never saw anybody like selling fuel, but also I was never really part of line units, so that wasn't a thing that I would have seen. However, I do remember a lot of times that we were having to trade fuel to get like the Iraqis to do anything. Like we would say, like when I was in Iraq, at a certain point, they're like, okay, American convoys cannot go into Iraqi cities without Iraqi escort, like either the police or the Iraqi army or whatever. So they would, the idea is that, you show up 9 a.m. start time, everybody, our Humvees and MRAPs are ready. In theory, they're, technicals or whatever they're coming in are ready, and we all go. Of course, this is Iraq, so inshallah yourself until about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And then when after many phone calls to the police chief saying, hey, where are you? Hey, where are you? Hey, where are you? And then finally the chief says, yeah, we're going to show up, but you guys need to gas up our trucks. Fine, whatever. We've got to do this thing. Get your fucking asses over here. We'll top off your shit and we'll go. Like that's the only like really time that I saw us using that. And like the American military is very, it is starkly different than really any other military. Like maybe the British military is probably the closest, just by the way that it is created. NCO Corps, Canadian military as well. But like when you get to these to militaries like the Russian military, Ukrainian military, things like that, like you couldn't just flood the United States Army with a bunch of javelins, right? Like you couldn't just like, hey, you guys are in trouble. We're going to bring you guys a bunch of javelins. That's just not how our logistics works at all. Nobody would know what the fuck to do with that. Like a supply sergeant would get them all and be like, I think I need to write down the NSNs. I don't know what's going on here. So it's, the way that these things work is a little different. So like in Russia, it's a lot easier to have that kind of graft where you're just like, we have extra fuel. This is going to take like 4 days. They're going to roll over. We can sell this stuff off. Personally, I would have waited until afterwards to sell all that shit off. But it's kind of like when you go to the range, right? If you don't use it, you lose it. So you gotta expend everything, or you gotta sell all those 5.56 rounds to somebody out there. So that's just me saying I never saw that kind of thing going. The biggest way that I saw people making money in slightly dodgy ways were majors who were buying rugs for really cheap and shipping them home and selling them for having their wives or somebody else sell them for a bunch of money, which I don't think was technically illegal, but I did feel was kind of taking advantage of the local labor. But
well, yeah, because you could buy a rug and you could ship it through the U.S. Postal Service in a tough box. And the cost of shipping it from Afghanistan or Iraq back to America would be like $50.
Yeah.
Including the cost of the tough box. And a lot of those rugs in Iraq were actually Iranian, and you can't legally buy Iranian rugs in America like the legit way. But if you're getting them, there in the market or whatever, you can absolutely circumvent that. In Afghanistan, it was fewer Iranian rugs because there's a huge like machine rug manufacturing industry in Turkey, and also just like domestic rug production is a thing throughout all of Central Asia. But yeah, same thing. People were buying rugs that would cost thousands of dollars for like $400 in Afghanistan, and then bringing them home and selling them. I saw, like you said, trading fuel. We did that because like the generators on the governor's compound needed diesel, and they didn't get diesel from their supplier because it had all been stolen. And so like at a certain point, like you were frustrated by the corruption, but you were also just like, well, they need power to do their job. And so we just, we had a truck.
You ended up becoming a part of it, an unwilling participant.
Yeah, we had a truck we called the Bomb because it was we were allowed to drive it, but we weren't allowed to drive a Humvee. The Bomb had 2 500-gallon diesel tanks on the back of it, and it was like a Frag 3 LMTV. So I don't know what Frag 3 stands for, but it's like third generation fragmentation armor kit. And LMTV, I don't know what the acronym stands for anymore, but it's like a light truck. It's like a 2.5 ton truck.
Light
multi-purpose transport vehicle. I don't fucking know. Long story short, but it wasn't. I mean, it was. If I remember correctly, it was either 4 wheels or 6 wheels, but it wasn't a huge truck. But anyway, we could drive to the Class 3 yard or to the fuel point on the big fob nearby and fill up with 1,000 gallons of diesel and bring it back. And we had a big diesel tank that we had found and had somebody repair. So we could basically keep that big tank full, and when we needed to resupply it, we would just go to the fob and get more. And so like the governor's guys would come to us and they would like fuel cans and be like, hey, yo, can we get like, 10 gallons of diesel? And we would be like, sure, yeah, it's fine, whatever. That's different. Like, we weren't selling it on the black market.
Sure. And you're not selling it for your own profit, basically.
No, of course not. And like, I'm not even saying this like OJ Simpson, if I did it, like this is more like when I think back on what I could have done and gotten away with, if I had wanted stuff that for my soldiers that I wasn't allowed to buy with the money they were giving me, I suppose I could have sold fuel and then got the cash for that and used it to like, I don't know, buy a washing machine or some shit like that. Hire somebody from Kabul to buy a washing machine and drive it down to us, that kind of shit. But that thought never crossed my mind because I feel like it would have damaged my relationship with those guys on the base who could like get me stuff that I need or like help me out with people. If I was, yo, man, give me 1,000 Afghani for this fuel or something like that. Like, that would have been more insulting to them, and that would have like damaged my standing with them. So in a way, I was like using it. We were using fuel to trade favors, but we weren't. It was more like, okay, now I know that guy, so he can get me a meeting with somebody, or he knows the good police chief that will actually send soldiers that aren't completely fucked up on drugs if I need to request a platoon of A&P for a mission. He knows a guy who can help out one of my outposts in a different district with like a problem they're having. Those kinds of things. It's different than, oh yeah, I'm selling fuel and getting money and using it to buy vodka or whatever the fuck. I suppose I could have done that and gotten hash or fucking opiates or over the, like, straight up just like Valium over the counter in Afghanistan. But I was too much of a Boy Scout. That shit never crossed my mind. It just genuinely never crossed my mind. I look back on it now. I'm like, yeah, man, I could have been fucked up out of my mind on drugs out there if I'd wanted to be. But I
was fucked up out of my mind a couple times, and I don't recommend it.
Yeah, I really wouldn't have wanted to be high in Afghanistan, like not as a soldier in an occupying army. Like, fuck that. Like, if I was a tourist and I was like in a guest house in like Badakhshan, hell yeah, I'd smoke hash till I die. But like, I'm not gonna do that when I like could potentially have to suddenly throw my armor on and go get shot at. Which happened in the middle of the night numerous times, where like I thought it was a chill day, and then we got blown up, and I had to run out and fucking, I hear gunshots and there's smoke everywhere. Hopefully they're not pointing at me. You know what I mean? Like, that did happen.
Yeah, I have been my first deployment. I got really shithouse drunk on some local Afghan gin with a couple of guys, and it was very like somebody had to grab me and put me to bed because they're like, "Dude, you smell like a fucking still. Like, you're fine. You're not like, I'm not a loud drunk. I'm not obnoxious, but it is like you need to sit in your room because if anybody above E5 catches you, we're all fucked." So. And I was very happy that fob did not get attacked that night because I was very out of my mind. And that's why, like, after that, I talk about how in Iraq we used to make our own wine, but I never got like shithouse drunk off of that. It was always Saturday night. We're gonna have some of our prison hooch and relax and smoke a couple cigarettes, and if something happens, we'll be fine. But also, I was on a big base in Iraq, so. Anything, if we got attacked, it's just get into the bunker. It's not, mount a wall or anything like that. So, also in Afghanistan, all I had was a fucking M9 pistol. So what the fuck was I going to do? What help was I for in any situation? None.
Yeah, I mean,
that's
what I would say too is this is just one of these situations where so much of this is coming off of individual reports, and even when it's been corroborated by, different testimony from different people who've been captured or surrendered. Like, I still think that if you're seeing it on Twitter in English, it's because anything that can be used as information war is being put out there, in support. And I think that it's very lopsided, the stuff that you're seeing from Ukrainian stuff versus Russian, just in the sense, I'm not saying there's systemic bias. I'm just saying it seems the Ukrainians are better at it and more West facing, English language facing than the Russians are. But
what it is, Nate, is that it's a quote just war, and I feel like that's where why there is a lot of like, rah Ukraine on this, especially from Americans. One, because there's a generation of Americans who hate Russia just because they have lingering feelings of Cold War and Soviet Union and just how Russia has been even since the fall of the Soviet Union. But also there's just this, we Americans just were involved in like a 20-year clusterfuck of a war that gained us nothing, spent a bunch of our money, got a lot of people hurt and killed, and did nothing for us. So,
and I mean, I also think that people like in their, even if they don't want to acknowledge publicly, like deep down know it was a moral crime. Like it was absolutely, especially Iraq was just a moral outrage. Like you can't look at what Putin just did and not be like, oh yeah, remember the last time something this big happened when America did it? Worse.
Right. Like you can say like Putin's fucking up like America is, and absolutely he is, because there's absolutely no way that he'd be able to, conquer and then hold Ukraine. There's, it's just not possible. Obviously we couldn't do it in Afghanistan or Iraq, in places where we literally set up our own puppet governments. We couldn't do it. So my argument here isn't that like, Putin is, not making the mistakes of America, but it is, when you look at it, as an American, you see Russia invading Ukraine, a very obvious, very blatant, and a thing that took me by surprise too. And then the immediate propaganda that came out, like which shit that I fell for too, like the Snake Island 13 or whatever, who, told the Russians to go fuck themselves and then got bombed into oblivion. They never died. They were fine. I don't know what the full story was behind it, but they weren't killed. And then
they were taken prisoner. And
then there's the Ghost of Kyiv, and then there's and all of these things, like, and I see a lot of people, and I saw all of this stuff, and then I went on vacation, and my vacation booted me off the internet for most of a week, and it really helped. That really helped my brain so much, because when I came back and I started reading everything, and I started to see, okay, where is everything lying? Where's the propaganda kind of lining up? And and it's just, I understand that it is very tempting to cheer on Ukraine, and I understand that it's very tempting to say that this is a problem because Ukraine has a lot of Nazis, just a lot of Nazis. It really feels like nobody can take pictures of Ukrainian soldiers and not accidentally catch a black sun patch somewhere. And as I said, there's just the thing. This is a situation that I am not experiencing. I am not a Ukrainian refugee. I am not a Ukrainian on a fire point, trying to repel Russian armor. I don't know what the correct answer is, and that's why, like, I try to stay away from a lot of that, because if the way I don't know what people would think that they should be doing in those situations. Like, if your neighborhood is getting shelled and somebody with a black sun patch rolls up in a truck and tells you, get your family, get your shit, throw it in the back of my truck, we're going to get out of here, I've got a safe point, are you going to say, no, our politics don't align? Or are you going to get your shit and throw it in there and go? Like, those are decisions that are having to be made by people in Ukraine. And it's very easy for us in America, in my nice warm home with the sun shining, with my electricity, with my full refrigerator and pantry and my clean fresh water and my internet connection, to sit here and make all these claims or things like that, say this, say that. And that's why I've tried to stay away from it as much as I can on the internet, because there's nothing that you can say that's going to make everybody say, yeah, that's a really good point. Only going to you're only going to piss some group of people off. And like, it's just like, this is not a scenario that any of us have any, relation to. Like, even you and I, who have been to war zones, who have been in the military, cannot in any way like fathom what would I do in this situation, because I don't know. And I hope that I never have to know. So that's where I kind of land with Ukraine. Like, obviously the answer is they have a right to defend themselves against a foreign invader. Now, no matter what the politics are before it, no matter what you feel about Russian imperialism, NATO imperialism, any of that stuff, the fact of the matter is, right now, Ukrainians are having to fight off Russian air, Russian armor, Russian artillery, because they have decided that they want to come in and they want to take over. And, as a red-blooded, God-fearing American, I'm an atheist, but as the good old boy, American soldier that I am, there is a 100%, Ukraine should be able to defend themselves, and I fully support, sending them aid and ammunition. I'm happy that like 20,000 people have like volunteered to go to Ukraine and are like pouring into Ukraine to fight off the Russians. Like, that's big. That's huge. It's not going to be me. I'm not doing it. I got a family. I'm not fucking doing all that nonsense. But that's all really big and really huge. And I can't have a opinion beyond, it's fucked up what Putin did, and I understand why they're fighting back. And anything after that, man, I cannot tell you one way or another how it's going to work, if it's going to be good, if it's going to be bad. I can't tell you what Ukrainian Nazis are going to be doing in 15 years with those javelins. I hope that they're not trying to fuck me up with them. I don't think they will, because Ukraine is literally on the other side of the world. But, it's one of those, look, we got to deal with that later, because right now there's a problem. So I don't know. I don't know what the correct answer is, other than fuck Russia for going into Ukraine. This all would have been solved by Putin not getting froggy. So
yeah, it's a nightmare across the board. And I agree with you in the sense that, like, I think a lot of those differences do get erased when you're actually in like a shooting war where civilians are being killed. I mean, there was reporting from the New York Times in Irpin, which is near Kyiv, this week, where civilians were in the street trying to get away from the front line, and a family was like 10 feet away from what looked like probably like an 81 or 120 millimeter mortar, and it killed all of them. It killed a woman, 2 kids, like a teenage boy, a little girl, and the father was severely injured and was probably going to die. And it's like, those were people with suitcases trying to get out and get away from the fighting. So, like you said, if the person rendering aid in that situation has fucking Nazi runes on his uniform, that fucking sucks. But like, it's one of the sort of like, what are you going to do kind of things in this present situation. I also think, though, that it requires people to be more circumspect about it and to not just cheerlead and very guilelessly share and boost and promote everything they can find. I think that it's very, very valid to raise these concerns, because if you are dumping these kinds of weapons, like, one of the things I'd say is that in Afghanistan, for example, it was incredibly expensive for people to get anti-air equipment, to the point where when they tried to do like dummy drops of anti-air weapons that had GPS trackers in them with the hopes of sort of figuring out where they got fobbed off to and where they were held and who had them, like using them as a means of tracing shit, they had to give up and stop. They couldn't just drop an SA-7 with a fucking tracking device in it in the middle of nowhere in Afghanistan, because no one would pick it up, because it's so obviously expensive that like people, the first thing they would think of is either this is a trap, or whoever this belongs to is going to come back and kill the shit out of me if I touch this.
Yeah.
So like, that's the thing. And so, as I understand it, in Iraq, they were more common, but still incredibly expensive. Like, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars in a country where people make a few $1,000s a year on average, to buy these things. These are very, very dangerous weapons. And it's like, you're giving them out to both the Ukrainian military and like its auxiliaries. What's that going to look like? I don't know. Like, that's a thing to be circumspect about. And people will be like, oh, that's Putin apologia. It's like, go suck my fucking dick. Look at what happened in Afghanistan in the 80s and 90s, man. Like, come on. Like, the weapons that we handed out then got used in a civil war between warring factions, and the people who suffered primarily from this were civilians. Like, this is just like please don't like by all means support Ukrainians, defense, but don't look at it like this unalloyed good that doesn't require scrutiny or follow up. Like, just don't be a fucking idiot. Don't be a child. That's the thing, right?
But also don't, look at these things and say we shouldn't be giving them anything and Ukraine should just roll over and let Russia take over. Like, again, there's not a correct answer here that I see. And if you are saying one or the other, I don't know if you understand what a refugee, like how bad it is to be a refugee. Like,
but also,
how bad
like,
it is
I think one of the reasons why NATO militaries are giving this much aid is that, for one, they don't want, there's the self-defense aspect of it, that they don't want Russia to roll over, non-NATO countries across Europe, without suffering consequences. Like, that's their sort of defense realpolitik view on things. And secondly, there's 44 million people in Ukraine, and over 1.5 million have already fled. Like, there's a lot of goodwill towards Ukrainian refugees now, but if the problem becomes tremendous, like, there won't be. You know what I mean? And so I think that there's definitely this this desire to support the Ukrainians, but that doesn't mean you have to like yassify Volodymyr Zelensky. Like, that doesn't mean you have to be an unthinking idiot. I'm not saying come away from listening to this podcast and say like, you should have a hard decision that you've made one way or the other, because I mean, I could see the argument for not dumping money into, a civil war that will then, or what will become a civil war that will, or an occupation that could potentially bleed over. I also see the argument for, no, they want to fight, they know how to fight, arm them so that they can repel Russia, and Russia eventually has to concede and leave. Like, I understand those arguments. And I don't think you're somehow equivocating by saying, I'm not going to give you an answer and say, this is what you must do and everything else is a mistake. I personally think that one of the reasons why you didn't see Stinger missiles from Afghanistan spread out elsewhere into conflicts in former Soviet states and Central Asia to a large degree, if not hardly at all, is because post-Soviet pullout, the U.S. sent people in covertly, and they paid a lot of money to buy those fucking stingers off people. And that's what's going to wind up happening, most likely, because those things, stingers, javelins, those are very, very dangerous weapons, obviously, if you know how to use them. Stingers are not just, stingers work on both fixed wing and rotary wing aircraft. Obviously, there's a height limit, but like if you are near a place where aircraft is taking off or landing, you can take down a fucking, if they built another AN-224, you could take one down with a Stinger. Like, it's a dangerous weapon. That's going to wind up happening. It's going to be a lot of money. It's a lot of, it's going to be a lot of concern. So don't just share this shit and say it's unalloyed good. Give them fucking Davy Crockett tactical nukes. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, be circumspect. And I think the best way to do that is just to read the news about it and all the claims being made. Well, as cold-bloodedly as possible. Like, be as scrupulous as you can be and scrutinize the stuff you see as much as you can. And don't feel as though you have to have a take. That's the best advice I can give. I mean, you don't have
to say anything. Like, you can literally not, like, I have written and deleted multiple tweets about Ukraine until I finally came to the, like, I don't have to say anything. We have this podcast. I can go into further detail here. And I feel like we both really kind of put out how we feel about the situation and the advice that we would give anybody else. And it's way, this is a much better platform for for a discussion like that, I feel, than to just blast off a couple of tweets. I would rather have arguments about, the best kind of cheese for a burger on Twitter. That's what Twitter's for me. And I get way more heat for, those opinions than anything else I do. So
there's a guy on Twitter who sucks. He's awful. He's the son of a famous person. He sucks really, really bad in a million different ways. He's just an awful person. But he did have a funny tweet years ago about people who get really down a rabbit hole about Syria and decide that they know the solution. And I do feel this way sometimes about some of the things I see people saying, especially when it's like the no-fly zone kind of stuff, like going really aggressively. Like, you didn't know what a no-fly zone was last week, and now you've decided it's the one solution. Like, these are all, when I see these things, I'm not going to get in fights with people, but I'm reminded of this tweet. And I won't even name the guy because, like I said, he sucks. But he said, last month you said if you're going to fuck a hot pocket, it should be a cheese hot pocket. And this month you're saying the head of the snake is in Araka. Like, he's 100% correct. Like I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. I think of myself as pretty decently informed on shit. I've been paying attention to Eastern Ukraine and Ukraine in general since 2014 for sure. Since the breakup of the Soviet Union, also just because I was interested in the area. Obviously, when we had Adrian on the show for a while, and he spent a ton of time there, and like his wife is from Ukraine, his stepson's Ukrainian. Like, he's got lots and lots of connections to it. So like, we had to kind of pay attention to it a little more, just because we talked about it more. But like, to be honest with you, if you had told me 3 weeks ago to find Melitopol versus Mariupol on the map, I wouldn't have been able to. If you told me to find Sumy on the map, I wouldn't have been able to find it. Like,
I can't find any of that stuff.
I know
now.
where Kharkiv is, and I know where Kiev is because they're the two biggest cities in the country. I know where Lviv is because Lviv is famously was at one point an incredibly important city for like European Jewish culture, and also like it's the westernmost big city in Ukraine. Like, it's very famous for its architecture. So like, yes, I can point out Lviv, I can point out Kiev, I can point out Kharkiv. That's it. Everywhere else, fuck man, I know shit. I know where Odessa is. I only know where Odessa is because I dated a girl who was from there a long time ago. But she was born in the Soviet Union. I mean, that's how long, like, it wasn't yet Odessa, Ukraine. So, you know what I mean? Like, it's one of these situations where you don't necessarily have to have an opinion or opine. And I think being circumspect and paying attention, reading as scrupulously as you can, and like not reacting defensively. Like, I'll be honest with you. I am wary of people who want to either make the Nazi connection the only thing they talk about or completely ignore it. I'm a little weirded out when people who have spent a lot of time talking about the Proud Boys and their far-right Nazi connections then turn around and say, well, it doesn't really matter in Ukraine. It's like, well, in Ukraine, these are auxiliary military units that are technically representative of the government. So like, in a way, it's worse. It's not just in a way. It is worse to have a far-right neo-Nazi regiment that works for the government than it is to have a weird partisan group that has nothing to do with the government, but basically has sympathizers in government. So like, that's a thing that's worth paying attention to. But also like, every one thing is not the same as every other thing. Every object is not the same size as every other object. Like, you can take stuff in context, and if stuff seems shrill or hyperbolic, it probably is. And this is going to be a very, very long slog, I think, like a long conflict, certainly longer than the Russians planned for. And I think if you do care and this does matter to you, then the important thing is to continue paying attention to it when people inevitably stop paying attention to it when there's a new crisis elsewhere. And that's all I can really say on it. Like, I think that no one is served by the feeling that you need to tweet about it. Like, if you were sent to Ukraine because you're a war correspondent working for the media, then like, yeah, you kind of do need to tweet about it because it's your job. Otherwise, like, you can take your time and formulate your thoughts and maybe opt to not say anything. And
it's perfect. It's perfectly fine to not talk about whatever is the hot topic.
And I also think too that like there are a lot of people. There are a lot of people that I respect. I might disagree with them on shit, but like, they held really hard to the position that U.S. intelligence is a joke and there's no way Russia's going to invade. And then Russia did invade, and it, corroborated U.S. intelligence. And, there have been some people who've just been pretending that didn't happen, and other people who I respect more have basically been like, yeah, we called this fucking wrong. We were super wrong. Like, I got to take some time to figure out why I got it wrong. Like, I respect that a hell of a lot more than just pretending that, that you weren't owned. You know what I mean? Like, we hedged our bets a lot. I said I didn't think it was going to happen, but until something changed, there was no point in arguing about it. And that if it does change, if it does turn into a war, it would be a catastrophe. And primarily because it's, mass death on the part of a lot of barely out of teenage years conscripts. And I still hold that position, but I was surprised that it happened. And like, maybe I got to think about why I got it wrong. So quite frankly, like, nothing wrong with that.
You know what? It was one of those, because before the invasion, I was like, Putin, if he does it, it's going to be the dumbest thing that he's ever done, and it's going to fuck things up for a long time. And like, that was the only, like, if he does it, it's really fucking dumb. I don't think he's going to do something that dumb, but it's Putin, so maybe he will. And I don't know, maybe somebody's going to be able to go back and find a tweet where I've just like, he would never do this. And maybe, you know what, I'll fucking admit constantly that I'm wrong and dumb. And me being wrong and dumb is what makes me smarter. So fuck it. I have no problem being incorrect or being corrected on the internet. I have been corrected more than once, and I will, I take those, as long as you are correcting me in a respectful way and not calling me the biggest dipshit in the world, I, am more open to taking those suggestions in. So feel free to always, tell me if I'm wrong about something. If you have some sort of evidence, just make sure that you do it in a nice way, please, because I'm a special snowflake and I don't like people to be mean to me.
Yeah, please don't be mean to me.
Nate, I think we've gotten to where we are, and apologies, we did not have a bonus episode this week. It was just a lot of things kind of fell through before I went on my vacation, and then Nate was sick, and so it was just kind of difficult. I think this is the first time, 6 years going now, first time we've dropped the ball on a bonus. So apologies to all of you who were waiting with bated breath. I promise you, I've got some good stuff lined up. I've got other episodes going. I'm sure that we're going to do some more dad chats and whatnot. So we've got some stuff out there.
We have a lot of bonus content. It's all available. A link in the show notes. We'll be back on track hopefully very soon when I no longer am testing positive for COVID and Francis is back in the rotation of things. So until then, thank you for your patience. Thank you for being listeners. If you're a Patreon supporter, thank you so much for being a patron. And we will speak to you next week.